The Judicial Service Commission has recommended Judge D Zondi for chairperson of the Electoral Court. The JSC is holding interviews for the third day to fill vacancies across 9 court divisions across the country. Mohlaoli is there. Very good afternoon to you, Tumaole. We know that it's been moments of tension and some really hard questions that the candidates have had to answer to. Talk to us about some of the latest developments.
Well, in terms of the latest developments, it was just an announcement in terms of the preferred candidate that was announced just a few moments earlier. And before I go into exactly what happened when you describe the tensions and some of the drama, if you will, that happened behind closed doors here, let's hear what Mvuzo Nonjesi, who is one of the commissioners, who announced that, of course, the preferred candidate would be Judge D Zondi, had to say when he made that announcement just about a few moments ago.
The deliberation in respect of the vacancy of the chairperson for the Electoral Court, there were 2 candidates that have been interviewed. The JSC, after deliberation in respect of that position, resolved to recommend for appointment Judge D Zondi as the chairperson of the Electoral Court. In respect of the member of the Electoral Court, the JSC has decided not to recommend any candidate. Thank you.
Can I just to clarify that we advise the President, we do not recommend, so that's what we'll be advising the President. Thank you.
Well, that was just a confirmation of the preferred candidate, and this is something that has been quite a process that the JSC has been following in terms of trying to ensure that after they have their interviews, they then make sure that they have a recommended candidate, a preferred candidate, and once that candidate is then selected, the process will then go on from there. Now, what I can tell you is that, of course, earlier there was that interview process and some very tough questions in terms of the electoral process, in terms of the understanding by the candidates about what the role of the Electoral Court is all about, and in terms of some of the scenarios that were thrown at them, it was quite difficult. But joining me right now to unpack most of these themes and what happened is Mr. Benedict Phiri, legal practitioner. Mr. Phiri, in terms of the process and the Electoral Courts, what can we understand about what is expected and what the interview process is looking for in these judges?
Yeah, I think firstly we must make sense of the role of the Electoral Court and where it sits in the democratic scheme. So the Electoral Commission is set up in terms of the Constitution, and its primary purpose is to manage free and fair elections in the country. Now, the Electoral Court basically then supports that in the sense that it reviews decisions of the Electoral Commission relating to electoral matters. It hears appeals relating to, what the Electoral Commission Act says is appealable to it, and also it makes rules relating to how disputes relating to, for instance, electoral code of conduct are adjudicated, etc. So it is very important within that particular scheme for a candidate in this particular position to understand the elective legislative framework to be able to give effect to essentially a free and fair election regime in the country.
And following this process, once a preferred candidate's name has been put into the hat, what happens then? Does this necessarily mean that the candidate is all set and go to occupy that vacant position?
No, that's not necessarily the case, because the name is simply a recommendation to the President, and then the President will make that appointment. He may or may not decide to go with the recommendation of the JSC, which we have seen many times where the JSC has made a recommendation and the President has decided not to necessarily go with it. But I'm not suggesting that this is the case, but that is a possibility, yes.
No, Mr. Benedict Phiri, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that analysis. That was a legal practitioner, Benedict Phiri, just giving us an overview of what happens firstly in terms of the importance of the Electoral Court itself, and also what happens post the name that has been preferred or recommended once it reaches, if one will, the doorstep of the President. So it certainly does not necessarily mean that the preferred candidate will necessarily get the nod. Of course, the candidates are then also they're hired, if one will, at the pleasure of the president. So there's still quite some processes that have to be followed. But certainly from the JSC's point of view, the candidate that got the nod would be Judge D Zondi. He's the preferred candidate as far as the commissioners here are concerned. And these judges are going through some very difficult interview processes, as we mentioned earlier, just about their understanding, application, interpretation, and overall importance of the legislative framework. Also, when one looks at the constitutional mandate of transformation in South Africa, transforming all aspects of South African society. Now, the Electoral Court is important, particularly because it fields any queries, any challenges to electoral outcomes and processes, something which is very important in the ongoing development of South Africa's democratic process. With that, it's back to you in the studio.
Very well, Tumaole, Mohlaoli. We leave it there for now, explaining, of course, some of the intricate processes in this interviews that are taking place.